Hello, everyone. This is Keith Dukes with TrainingPros, and I'll be your host this afternoon. We do want to welcome you to our fifth presentation in our ongoing Learning View series. And our intention today is to continue to provide both our clients and our consultants insights into topics of relevant interest to the business learning professionals. And I'm sure that you'll find that today's topic of creating online blending learning will be very timely and informative. Uh, it looks like we had a strong Miami contingent joining us. Someone asked me where I was located. I'm in the Atlanta area. I'm a relationship manager with TrainingPros, and for those of you that may not be that familiar with TrainingPros, what we do is we work with clients that trying to deploy or develop a learning and development solution. They find out they don't have the right internal resources or not or enough of them, and we help find them learning and development consultants that can come in and work with them on a project basis to deliver against their project requirements. So if you look at projects, our core expertise ranges in areas of expertise you see on the screen here right in front of you. Everything from instructional design, training coordination, project management, organizational development, all the way down to some of the editing, technical writing, and copywriting aspects of a project. And like I said, what we're doing today is we're in conjunction with Harrisburg University, who a leading provider of master's level programs in learning technologies. We're leveraging their expertise to bring you some extremely strong content on the creating blending learning this afternoon. We're going to be joined, and I'm very honored to be able to present to you Andy Petrosky from Harrisburg University. Andy is the director and assistant professor of learning technologies there at Harrisburg, and he coordinates the learning technologies Master of Sciences programs there at the university, and is also involved with their online programs. Now, not only is we're very fortunate to have Andy here with us, because not only is Andy involved with the academic programs at Harrisburg University, but he's also involved with the implementation of enhanced learning technologies in courses there at the university. So he has practical expertise from the delivery aspects. Plus, he also consults with commercial clients in external business environments and companies on how they can use it, learning technology. So, with that, Andy's going to take over, and I'm going to sit back and look forward to continuing to learn more. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Keith. As Keith mentioned, there are a few roles I play at the university, all of which involve some element of considering blended and online learning, which we'll talk about a lot more today. I'm sharing some of my contact information on the screen now, so please feel free to contact me through social media or email as a result of this session, or anything around learning technologies, emerging technologies, game simulations, or our Learning Technologies Master of Science program. I'll also display that contact info again at the end of the session. So really glad that everyone could join us for today's session to talk about blended and online learning. And as we consider blended and online learning, many of today's learning environments are moving towards those solutions. These new strategies are being used to address student preferences, resource challenges, and to take advantage of the individualized learning that can occur in online and blended learning environments. But without the tools to transition from face-to-face instruction, there's often a struggle with rigor, instructional strategies, and technology integration as we move towards these solutions. So today we're going to consider a variety of blended and online learning options, explore the drivers for moving to online and blended learning, analyze training for blended learning opportunities, review some examples, consider technology in online and blended learning, and look at challenges and considerations for a blended and online learning environment. So lots going on today, and we'll get right at it here. We did ask you to note your reason for attending the webinar when you registered. Overall, everyone is looking for just generally new ideas and techniques to enhance their current instructional design work and project work in training and development. And for the most part, everyone just generally wants to learn more about blended and online learning. So we'll provide that general overview as well as some specifics and strategies for those of you that may have a little bit more experience. As you have questions or comments throughout the session, please type them in the text chat. As many of you have already been noting your locations and other comments in the chat, please continue to do that. If you have questions that are more in depth, you may want to type them in the Q&A pod, which is over to the left here of the presentation area. My arrow doesn't point left, but hopefully you'll get the idea there. And that's a space to type more detailed questions or questions that you don't want to get lost in the chat scroll. If I'm unable to get to all the questions during the session, I will address them in the follow-up blog post on the TrainingPros blog. And I only ask that you keep the Q&A questions to the content or the topics that we're discussing. Any questions you have about technology or logistics or anything like that, or again, any short comments, please type those in the chat. So, there are a variety of reasons that you might be considering or have moved to online and blended learning, but generally there are four main drivers: time, location, technology, and resources. Time away from the job is a constraint on employees' ability to attend face-to-face training or more traditional training environments. The content or skills that employees are being trained on is changing more quickly and more rapidly and becoming more complex as well on a more timely basis. And then finally, the organization needs employees trained and upskilled more quickly. Those are three considerations for online and blended learning based on time driving decisions or driving movement towards these solutions. As we review the matrix, please type any additional considerations for each driver or your thoughts in the text chat. We'll kind of just do this quick overview on drivers from the standpoint of strategies and goals for online learning. So if we think about location, employees are often in the field, working from home, traveling to meet clients, etc. As well, time in the physical location can be limited for employees as a part of all of that. And even medium-sized organizations are distributed nowadays among several locations, often with bi-coastal locations or even overseas operations, even if those are shared office spaces. So location certainly is a driver in some of these decisions. And essentially getting people together for training face-to-face is more difficult than it ever has been. And when it's done, the face-to-face time needs to be used most efficiently and effectively. Technology continues to be a disruptor and an enabler in all parts of our business and personal lives. In some sense, technology has disrupted the workplace to create all of the previous drivers mentioned around time and location and many more, but it's also enabled the ability to blend learning solutions and provide online learning opportunities much more easily. So technology is kind of a push and a pull driver in this instance. To some extent. When we think of resources, the lack of, the distribution of, or the optimization of resources is a driver for most initiatives. Really, it's all about how can we work more efficiently and effectively. Why is it important to consider these drivers for blended and online learning? Having a purpose or a strategy from which your efforts are driven will allow you to measure success and connect training initiatives to business impact. Like any training initiative, those should be goals or deliverables as part of training solutions or learning solutions. Yes, you could do blended learning just because we can nowadays. The technology is there, the acceptance is there, but there may be side effects to the learners, the learning outcomes, and the organizations without having a sound strategy in mind. As we continue, we'll come back to this a little bit and just keep this in mind as we move forward. Along with a mix of drivers for blended and online learning, there are a variety of outcomes to target. And I'd like to learn a little bit more now about the types of targets you have for blended and online learning. I'm just going to bring a poll out onto the screen here. And let me broadcast those results. So just share a little bit about what outcomes you are hoping to achieve or you're targeting with any current online or blended learning initiatives. And if you're really just at the beginning stages, certainly highlight some of the things that you're thinking of or that are moving you in this direction. And certainly if you have others from what are listed there on the screen or in the poll, please indicate that and then also type those in the text chat. What those other outcomes may be. And I'll just give you a moment to fit. Okay, so there's a pretty even distribution. There may be some of you that typed all of those. Again, if you selected other and can type a note about what that specific outcome is in the text chat, that would be great. We have Teresa indicating new hire onboarding, and some others are also typing in the text chat there. So just a sense, again, of some of the potential outcomes, what others are targeting, and just a way to kind of something to keep in mind as we move forward are those specific outcomes that you're looking for and those goals based on those drivers perhaps. Along the learning continuum, there are a number of opportunities for blended learning. We're considering the continuum and what I have here on screen here with the expectation that there is some peak or apex of the learning that will occur. So in kind of a fairly straightforward view of blended learning, that's often the classroom training, and that could be the case, but it also could be a conference, or it could be a product launch, or maybe it's a simulation-based, online, solution or game or something. Really could be a variety of things, but we're considering a continuum with the assumption that there is there's a culminating learning event that is a peak or apex of the blend. The matrix indicates where blended learning opportunities may be most beneficial along the time continuum, the pre-apex, apex, post-apex, and ongoing, as well as a particular learning state. The preparation is where learners are becoming acclimated to the need or purpose of training. New information is often a preliminary state, but new information can be something that learners experience throughout the continuum as well. Practice is often a secondary or tertiary state, but it doesn't have to be. Again, learners might practice throughout the continuum, even as a pre-apex activity. Discussion among learners, facilitators, managers, and subject matters experts is the same, can happen along the continuum. Integration refers to the integration of new knowledge, skills, or attitudes into the workplace. Reflection represents self-evaluation of learning and performance, as well as receiving peer and manager feedback. Reflection may also address an analysis of the learning experience and recommendations for improvement. So this is a quick snapshot of really, again, looking at a continuum of learning events and opportunities and potential learner states and the suggested or perhaps optimal spots for blended learning. And you can see there are quite a few there, and certainly situations that may not fall into any one of those states that would also be appropriate. So again, I want to kind of get a sense of where you guys are and what you're thinking now. This time you only have one option that you can select. So these are this poll is a representation of that matrix, and I'd like you to select one option that's kind of your state and stage of the continuum that you think you could have the most impact with regarding blended learning, blended online learning, blended learning solutions. And I'll just give you a moment to finish up there. And it looks like at this point we have a clear winner. New information at the apex. And actually I'd be interested if those of you that selected that would type in the text chat why you think that's your optimal spot for a blended learning solution. And there's no right or wrong answer. I'm surprised that most folks selected that. Okay, so it's somewhat client driven. There's blended, blended at the apex in a lot of cases. Wouldn't require customized or programmed feedback. It could be live feedback. That's a good point. Okay, so I would beyond the feedback, I would recommend that certainly as part of today's sessions and ongoing learning view sessions and professional development, that we really focus on as instructional designers and training development professionals. Certainly consulting with the clients to move them beyond their focus on information at the apex or new information at the apex of training, or conveying information as the primary element in training design or training delivery in organizations. And actually, blended learning, and I'll kind of hit on this next, really presents, and blended and online learning really presents a lot of opportunities for moving beyond information and into higher order thinking skills and practice and application as a part of blended learning solutions or part of training solutions. Now, Teresa Davenport, who's participating in this session, but also doing the next Learning Views webinar, is probably having a heart attack at this point, because I told her I wasn't going to mention Bloom's taxonomy. But Teresa, this is the only slide, and I'm just going to kind of comment here quickly. As you consider the previous diagram and what I said about practice being something that can be done throughout the learning continuum, consider that not all skill development needs to start with knowledge at the foundation. Blended and online learning create great opportunities for learners to learn by doing, and we don't take advantage of that enough as instructional designers, as I just said. Again, we often feel or are directed to provide all the facts before giving learners an opportunity to try. There are two models on screen that represent flipping the traditional Bloom's taxonomy for targeting learning by enabling creation, evaluation, and analyzing as the foundation for learning instead of facts that we remember. And then information is presented or available to the learner around that creation, evaluation, or analysis. Consider this as you take advantage of blended and online learning and the opportunity to, again, achieve higher levels of learning and performance with these types of solutions. And I will leave the rest of Bloom's taxonomy and blended learning and online learning design and objectives and assessment to Teresa for June. And we'll move forward looking at modes and mediums. So as we think about the blends of modes and mediums available to us for blended and online learning, the options can be mind-boggling, but there are really four major modes: synchronous or asynchronous, and analog or digital. A medium can be synchronous analog, synchronous digital, asynchronous analog, or asynchronous digital. Now, there are mediums that cross the lines, and there are variations on all mediums, but this is a general way of categorizing those modes and mediums. So take a moment and look at this diagram and let me know if there are any mediums that are not represented here that you might suggest, or any mediums that you have a question about. And you can type those comments and those questions in the And I'll just give you another moment to review those. Again, there's a lot there, but kind of an overview of a number of the options, and would love to, again, hear any comments on anything that's missing, or any questions that you have about any of the mediums that are listed. Layla, that's an interesting comment. I would probably label micro learning more a design than a medium. These mediums are, almost any one of them are ways in which micro learning could be delivered. And micro learning is yet another format that could be blended and online as well. So. Nancy, microlearning is small learning chunks, so things that are, even quick simulations through email, 5-minute, 10-minute, learning experiences. All right, so if there's no other comments or questions, again, just kind of an overview of the variety of modes and mediums that are available for blended and online learning. What I'd like to do next is consider all of those drivers, opportunities, and modes and mediums, and again, emphasize that it can be difficult to determine the best blend of solutions with all of those options. So way back in 2003, I had a consulting company and worked with a client who was struggling with this in his organization. Essentially, his issue was that SMEs, subject matter experts, and managers were determining that every learning solution was a face-to-face classroom training, even though they had a pretty robust set of options and technologies in their organization, and a good skill set in their learning solutions department around creating online or at that time computer-based training solutions. So me and my team worked with the client to determine a variety of variables and impacts that go into determining training delivery. We called it the Training Delivery Decision Guide. And you're going to use it now to conduct a training analysis to determine modes and mediums for a training solution. So think of a training solution that you're doing analysis for now, or maybe a project that you recently completed, or even one that you took as a learner if you're not an instructional designer. And I'm going to paste the link to the guide, and it's also on screen, but I don't want you to go out there quite yet. What I'd like you to do when you do go out to the link is answer the questions in the guide. You may need to make assumptions, and there may be some questions that are unclear, but do the best you can with it. Think of this as an exercise as well and not an actual analysis. So don't think too much about the questions. Don't get paralysis by analysis there, but complete the guide and see what results. Remember to keep in mind that this was built in 2003, so some of the terminology and options may be a little bit dated, but the general impact and intent of it is sound. Should take you about 10 minutes to complete. After you're done, come back in and indicate what profile you received. So you'll get a profile report after the first set of questions, and it'll either be asynchronous a profile, or you can't be selecting it yet because you haven't completed the profile or the guide. But you can change that vote later. It'll either be asynchronous, it'll be synchronous, or it'll be a blend of the two with an even blend. So 50% asynchronous, 50% synchronous, or asynchronous will be the primary, so a higher percent, more than 50% asynchronous, less than 50% synchronous, or more than 50% synchronous, less than 50% asynchronous. Then, after another set of questions, you'll get suggestions for a medium and a score for that medium. You'll actually get a variety of mediums that are presented to you. Type those in this text chat after you come back in, and then finally at the bottom text chat there's opportunity for comments and questions about the training delivery decision guide. So again, now's the time. You can go click on that link in the text chat, go out to the training delivery decision guide and answer the questions and come up with those the profile and the suggested mediums. As you're doing so, note some of the questions and ones that you might think were maybe unique or you had never thought of before, or whatever the case may be, and certainly type those in the comments and questions as you come back in after completing that guide. It is Flash-based, so if you have any difficulties, that may be the issue. Although if you're on a desktop, you shouldn't have any problems with it. All right, so take about 10 minutes, go out and click that link that I typed in the text chat, and do your training analysis exercise for blended learning. So take about another 5 minutes to finish up the guide and post your results and comments here. And then we'll summarize and take a look at some blended learning case studies. Thanks, Charlene. And what was your score for CBT and webcast? It should be to the right of that. It's a scale of 1 to 100, and normally 50 and above is displayed. Okay, so it looks like we have some mediums beginning to come in here, and as part of that, and also looking at the profile results, even if the profile indicates a specific mode, either asynchronous or synchronous only, the mediums will recommend a variety of mediums to consider, again within that scale of 1 to 100. In that particular mode. So there's a blend among modes and then a blend among mediums that's an opportunity. And there's no, it's not a formula to come to a concrete conclusion. It's a formula for suggestions and consideration based off of the questions that were asked. And for those of you that are entering your mediums and your scores, really appreciate that, and also would love to hear any comments or questions you have about the guides or the questions that were asked in the in the product. And we have some more folks finishing their profiles as well, and we'll just take another couple minutes here to finish up and look at some comments and questions as they come in as well. Yeah, Joe, I mentioned it was 2003, although that's not an invalid question today, even whether the machines have sound cards. I've still run into or talked with people where that's a reality of the environment. And I warned you ahead of time about the retroness of the some of the questions and some of the mediums as well. And Tim, the only thing I would offer is that, again, back in 2003, there weren't as many parallels. Web-based training and computer-based training were two separate things. And I'm certainly dating myself and proud of it. Deb, and that was the exact purpose of the tool. Again, it wasn't, a machine that was spitting out a solution. It was a way to present to people other options and other considerations, and to get them to think about what their environment or their goals or the impact of the training might lead to regarding a specific solution or recommendation, based off of always going with, much like today, the de facto solution is probably, a e-learning tutorial with information, where in 2003 the de facto standard was a classroom training with information. So it really is just to provide some different perspective and to do some deeper analysis. Oh, that's interesting, Tim. My assumption would be, and the way I hear them and refer to them, actually is as e-learning, that it's all one. But that's interesting to know that you're hearing of them as separate things still. Deb, this was built in Flash, so it actually was prototyped in Excel. We did a full day, actually it was a 2-day exercise with the client on determining the questions and the potential, well, first we determined the potential variables that could impact the selection of a mode and a medium. Then we determined the specific questions and options with the client, and then prototyped that in Excel and did all the formula work in Excel and transferred that over to Flash, which again at the time was really the leading multimedia development tool. Maurice, no, there isn't. I think there's definitely still some value in it, but at the time when I was looking to productize it, there wasn't really a lot of interest, and something certainly I could re-look at. I really brought it back from the dead for this particular presentation. I do use it in some of my courses as well with students, but I haven't used it with external clients or with external clients, or looked at updating it. So we're going to move on from here. I appreciate your comments and questions about the delivery guide. I will, if there are any that I didn't address, we'll get to those in the in the follow-up blog post that we do as a part of these webinars. So now let's look at some examples, now that we've kind of considered the larger scope of blended learning and really the considerations that go into blended and online solutions. The first one I want to look at is a solution from Comcast, and any of you that joined us for the social learning webinar, that would have been back in, let's see, that would have been back in the fall probably, one of the learning views from the fall. We profiled this Comcast case study as a social learning case study, which it is, but it is also a good case study in blended learning. So for those of you that may not be familiar with Comcast, which I'm pretty sure it's everywhere, but you may not, if you're outside of Southeast PA, you may have another cable provider. They are a geographically dispersed media and entertainment company with approximately 100,000 employees working in 39 different states. 5,000 of those employees are frontline supervisors. In 2008, with thousands of frontline supervisors spread across the U.S. and growing rapidly, Comcast University knew that it needed to be creative in order to ensure that their high-quality supervisor training would be able to keep pace with the company's tremendous growth and maintain the levels of services needed for the leadership community in the organization's operations. So what they needed to do was to adapt the in-person principles of leadership course to move from face-to-face classroom training to something that was much more flexible and able to be distributed more geographically. As the business evolved and as the pressures of the business were being monitored and worked through in a business partner model, Comcast University proactively developed
Hi folks, it looks like Andy dropped off for just a second, so bear with us for a moment while we see what's going on, and he'll be back in a moment.
Sorry about that, guys. I'm back. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but anyway, we were talking about supervisor training for Comcast. They adapted their in-person Principles of Leadership course to be facilitated in a virtual social learning environment, enabling them to reach new supervisors in a timely fashion, regardless of location. The format included both synchronous and asynchronous activities, community interaction, instruction from a facilitator, and homework assignments. Principles of Leadership was optimized to fit within this framework and developed specifically with an eye toward on-the-job learning transfer. They then piloted the new virtual Principles of Leadership program with a diverse group of supervisors possessing varied levels of comfort with the technology. So the goal was the adaptation of this Principles of Leadership to a blended social virtual solution. So what they did was brought company leaders and regional managers into the discussion of the business case for the virtual approach and blended approach. Those same leaders participated in a pilot program as auditors so they could see the program in action and see if they saw value in the new program, ultimately to be ambassadors to communicate the success of the program. They implemented a communication plan to explain the proposed program and emphasize the primary advantage that would be for managers. And they also emphasized that the new frontline managers or supervisors would be able to participate without having to sacrifice 2 entire work days, which was the case with the face-to-face classroom training. They created a train-the-trainer experience for virtual online instructors, and they did a technology orientation for the learners. So keep in mind some of those implementation items as we conclude later. We'll look at some ID considerations for blended and online learning. The solution resulted in, or things that were part of the solution was virtual instructor-led training, a space for asynchronous collaboration and content, a robust online classroom management environment for instructors to coordinate and track activity, a single learning portal for access by learners, and then intermittent 1-hour self-study work with 1.5 live online sessions with pre and post work for both of those for those sessions. There was some sustainability that was incorporated as a part of this solution, and that was really involving the supervisors, managers heavily as a part of this, and them actually taking the course themselves. And some of the outcomes that you can read on screen here, they achieved the goal of getting the new supervisors into and completed with the Principles of Leadership program within the first 90 days of their roles. And again, that was part of their challenge with face-to-face classroom, is the time frame it took people to get in there. They found that the quality was not sacrificed, and they've developed multiple other virtual training programs off of this model and actually centralized at that time their learning operations as a result of this project. So they really, as a result of this project, kind of re-envisioned the training. And Nancy, yes, interpersonal skills were definitely a part of this instruction and practice in that those online live virtual sessions. So another example I want to share with you is legal issues for managers. This is a blended learning solution that included online learning through simulations and face-to-face classroom training. The goal of the blended learning was to improve managers' comfort and performance when it came to talking with employees about law-based HR issues. Much like the Comcast example, there was also a need to shorten the training time and give access to the practice and the concepts to managers within a fairly short period of time of them starting versus having to wait for the classroom training to be scheduled. The course was previously taught in a full day face-to-face classroom setting or format. The managers took the online learning before going to a classroom session, and the online learning also enabled immediate access for the learners or the new managers to practice and experience the concepts around legal issues for new managers. In the face-to-face classroom session, the online simulations then were reviewed and discussed. So the time between taking the online simulations and the face-to-face classroom time could be anywhere from, a week to 3 or 4 months. So there was definitely a review and a connection of all the concepts and the practice once they came back into the classroom. Then additional simulations are reviewed and discussed within the context of addressing scenarios and guidelines for all of the targeted legal issues. Attendees can take notes in a workbook that provides point-by-point details for each act and each legal issue that's targeted, and general recommendations for addressing requests related to each act. So the information about each act in the blended solution is a leave behind versus the original face-to-face classroom solution, where the information about each act was the focus of the full day training. So the managers basically came into a classroom and, got information about each act and had very little time to practice or to consider how they would react to employee requests as a part of this. So we talked about that early on, about the opportunities for blended learning to really target higher levels of learning. And then I have 2 other examples that I actually pulled off the web to give you an idea of the breadth and depth of options for blended and online learning. And I'll just display these on screen for a short time for you to read through for yourself. This first one is about project management. And Maurice, to answer your question in the Q&A, I believe, yes, Comcast did develop these courses internally, which was part of them centralizing their training operations after the project. And the second example, for this one, if you're having any trouble reading it, there's a crosshairs button at the top right of the presentation screen, and you can click that to go full screen, and you then move your cursor up to the top of the screen, and that crosshairs button will display again. You click it again, and you'll come back to this presentation space if you're having trouble reading any of the notes there. And this one's kind of hard to, consume in one view. So we'll just take a moment with it, but realizing that it's a fairly complex diagram. But you can come back to it in the recording. I also have a link to it at the bottom of the screen here as well. It'll be included in the resources that we'll offer at the end of today's session. Sharon, CBT most commonly, at least in instructional design, instructional technology field, means computer-based training, which again, that's a very broad term essentially, but its original intent was primarily training delivered on a CD-ROM or even a flash drive or something, a device that had to be either inserted or connected to the computer. Okay, so now after, again, taking a look at a kind of high level and analysis and some specific examples, and the examples, as you saw with all the options and modes and mediums for online and blended learning, we could talk about hundreds of different examples of combinations of modes and mediums that make up online and blended learning. But let's look at the technology briefly as we begin to sum up here and conclude. These are listing. This diagram's listing the technologies that were incorporated or used in the examples provided. So again, you can read through this list on your own, but certainly there's a good representation of a variety of technologies here, and the software rollout included many more than I could list on screen as well. So just offer this as kind of a summary and a reflection of all of the technologies that were included in the examples that we looked at, and certainly if you have any questions or comments on these specific technologies, certainly you can type those in the text chat. But again, shows just the variety of options and types of technology and solutions that can be incorporated into online and blended learning. regardless of the specific technology, there are primarily 4 technology types that allow you to implement blended and online learning to its fullest potential. Some of these terms you're probably familiar with, others you may not be as much. LMS, most everyone in the webinar is probably familiar with the term LMS and familiar with it as Learning Management System. This is where learners often register and participate, register for participation, and where completion is tracked. The Course Management System, or CMS, or Content Management System even in corporate learning case, is where materials are posted, polls are conducted, and discussions are housed, among other activities and resources that are part of the CMS to support blended learning. So those are just a few of the things among a variety of things that can happen, or activities that can happen in a CMS. Now, the LMS and CMS functionalities may be contained in one system in some organization, and LMSs have evolved to include a lot more interactivity and a lot more social learning components, but I break them apart here today just from the standpoint of functionality and their original functionality. So one tool may address both the LMS and CMS role in blended and online technology, blended and online learning. Otherwise, you may need multiple resources if you don't have an LMS that has combined functionalities. Finally, you need a synchronous solution. Even if 99% of your solution is asynchronous, you should have some element of a synchronous component in your blend that allows people to connect in real time. Our online asynchronous courses at Harrisburg University, so courses that students take on their, at their own time, logging on at any time, there's no formal class sessions they attend. Those courses include an optional weekly online synchronous session for Q&A and office hours. It's been proven that online learning is a better experience and results in better outcomes with some sort of synchronous human element to it. And then finally, the same for asynchronous. Even if you have a fully or mostly synchronous solution, whether it's digital or analog, there is certainly a benefit and an impact to having a place where learners can communicate, practice, and reflect on their own time. So an asynchronous tool makes it easier to address some of the drivers that we were talking about earlier in the webinar around participation in synchronous and especially where we're coming from, originally in training and development and as face-to-face as a primary mode and medium for training. We use Moodle as our course management system at Harrisburg University, and we use it as part of blended learning for faculty as well. We have about 60 faculty teaching courses each semester, including adjunct and professional education faculty, while there is a small portion of full-time faculty that get together for governance meetings. Even getting the full-time on-site group together is a challenge, not to mention then that there are also the other 45 faculty members each semester that are not here physically on a regular basis or at all if they're teaching in our online programs. And those online and graduate programs have blossomed. So we have faculty in Canada and India and really throughout the US as well. So we built LearnHU on Moodle as a hub for faculty development and conversation. LearnHU includes content sharing, discussion forums, faculty profiles, and a variety of other ways that faculty can access resources, share best practices, and connect with one another on an ongoing basis. It's often a location where resources are posted in preparation for live training sessions and where materials and recordings from the live trainings are made available. So that's an example of a course management or content management system in that kind of technology blend. So finally, let's look at some considerations for ID and facilitation in blended and online learning environments. So this diagram or table on screen indicates maybe some instructional design activities in a single mode where you're just doing classroom, or you're just doing a webinar, or you're just doing an e-learning tutorial or e-learning solution. And some of the considerations in a blended mode where you need to select and coordinate multiple mediums versus one, and you need to manage and implement multiple deliverables versus just one solution. And those deliverables often are interdependent among each other as well as a part of a blended solution. You're also looking at creating instructional strategies across multiple sessions and not just for one single learner experience. You also, in blended modes, are looking at and need to consider much more higher level of learner accountability, again, with a focus on those higher levels of learning and higher order thinking skills that are available to us in blended, or much more available to us in blended solutions versus single solutions. And I'll use the classroom as an example again, where really attendance is often the only learner accountability, where in a blended mode strung across a variety of experiences, students may actually be creating product and may even be creating work product, so proposals, examples, project management plans, etc. And again, in a single mode, you're often just checking for understanding or completion versus blended modes where you're really, again, doing evaluation of things that learners are creating, and you're doing that evaluation across a number of mediums. As you think about how instructional designer roles may change as well, this diagram is another way to consider that changing nature of instructional design skills with blended online and social learning modes. Facilitation of learners, resources, modes, collaboration, and conversation is the skill set versus presenting information or designing presentation. So a few final challenges and considerations to think about. This was part of the Comcast model case study or example as well, but consider technology orientation and support for learners, especially as there may be juggling multiple technologies as a part of a blended solution. Consider manager involvement, again, because of the learner, the level of participation, the level of commitment, or the level of creation that's being asked for by the learners, and accountability. Certainly the manager and involving the manager in that can have a great impact. Also consider mandating or creating requirements for compliance with assignments. So if you're asking learners to do something as part of a blended learning solution, for example pre-work, and they don't do that pre-work, they get locked out of the next session. They can't just participate, or I'm sorry, they can't just attend, they have to participate as part of that. So consider that as part of some of the again, challenges and considerations. Also think about group work and the challenges and tribulations of that. There's certainly a lot of benefits to it as well, but as a facilitator, you're going to need to manage a variety of different personalities and potentially conflicts that you don't have to manage in single mode situations in a lot of cases, again, where there's less learner accountability. Again, focus on that real-world application as a part of blended learning and take advantage of those higher order thinking skills. Also consider reflection as part of the process, especially as people move throughout the continuum, but also as part of concluding the continuum. And finally, that course management system, or that place where people can asynchronously reference resources, submit assignments, discuss with each other, ask questions, is a really important part of that blended learning mode. So this is what we set out to do today, and I hope we've accomplished it and you got what you were hoping out of today's session. If you have continued interest in this topic, there will be a TrainingPros webinar again in June with Teresa Davenport that will further explore instructional design for online and blended learning, and there will also be a follow-up blog post to this webinar. So I'll leave my contact information on screen. I'll ask you to stick with us. We're going to go to a layout where we'll have some resources for. And then we will also have some feedback that we're going to ask you to supply for us. And Maurice, I'll ask you to clarify, perspectives on perspectives on self-paced versus instructor-led. Like which is better? My perspectives are there's really bad self-paced learning and there's really bad instructor-led learning. There's really good or great self-paced learning and there's really bad instructor-led learning. So those are my perspectives on it. It's really depends on the design and certainly the delivery of the solution. Elizabeth, Apex would be, again, that culminating event, and we reference that as potentially a classroom training or a conference, or maybe it's a product launch. And then pre-Apex would be everything that would happen before that kind of culminating event as part of the learning continuum. Again, that Apex is normally, or in kind of a very straightforward look at blended learning, that Apex is often a classroom session or a series of classroom sessions. So there can be multiple Apexes even in a learning solution. I'm going to go to some promotional slides and just thank TrainingPros again for their part in this webinar, which this would not happen without them, and also highlight again some of our programs here at Harrisburg University, specifically the Learning Technologies Master of Science program, and also some of our professional education webinars and workshops. And thank Keith for hosting today and doing the introduction, as well as remind you of some of the services that TrainingPros provides. And also, again, final thank you to TrainingPros and recognition of our partnership with them. We do some other webinars and actually partner with the Greater Philly ATD chapter on a webinar series called 4 on the 4th at 4 that brings panelists online for a real detailed discussion and Q&A opportunity for experts in the field to answer your questions and comment on topics. And then again, want to remind you about Teresa Davenport's session coming up in June. So with that, we're going to move to the feedback screen, and we'll leave you from here. The resources have moved to the bottom right corner. You can continue to chat, and then you can select your options in the polls, in the feedback polls, and you do not need to submit. Your option will be automatically recorded, and you can change that option if you would, if you'd like to as well, and that'll be automatically registered. Finally, the final feedback option. I'd love to hear your thoughts on other topics that you would be interested in learning about, either related to this topic or other topics in e-learning, training development, etc. So thank you again for attending today and your participation throughout. I had a great time. I hope you did as well, and we will see you guys in June. Thanks, everyone.